Your employment here is terminated, effective immediately. Security will remove you from the premises within the hour. Callista Rhodes didn't even have the courtesy to look at me when she said it. Just kept scrolling through her phone, manicured nails clicking against the rose gold case. Like firing someone was the same as ordering lunch from that overpriced salad place she frequented. 26 years old, sitting in an office chair that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Wearing a Chanel blazer her father probably bought her as a congratulations gift for finally graduating business school after 6 years and 3 university transfers. I'm Avery Langston. 53 years old. Former Army logistics officer. Current majority shareholder of the company this spoiled child thought she was running. But she didn't know that yet. Security's already been notified, she continued, still not making eye contact. We're restructuring for a more dynamic leadership team. Your skill set no longer aligns with our vision going forward. Dynamic leadership team. That's corporate speak for, I want to hire my sorority sisters and give them made-up executive titles. I'd seen the LinkedIn posts, the Instagram stories, all those glossy photos of Callista and her friends at networking events where they drank champagne and talked about disruption without understanding what the word actually meant. I stood there in front of her desk, the same desk where her father, William Rhodes, and I had signed our first partnership agreement 29 years ago when Cascade Freight Solutions was just 2 trucks, a rented warehouse, and a dream that logistics could be done differently. Back when William was scrambling to understand basic accounting principles and I was the one who'd structured our entire operational framework after leaving the military. The HR representative standing behind Callista looked like she wanted to disappear into the expensive wallpaper. Daphne something, barely 30, probably hired last month. She clutched her tablet like it was a shield, eyes darting between me and her new boss, clearly uncomfortable but not brave enough to speak up. If you're new here and enjoying these powerful stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more. Let me know in the comments what part of today's story touched you most. I want to handle this properly, I said, my voice calm and level. The kind of calm you learn after managing supply chains during active combat deployments, where one mistake could cost lives instead of just money. I'd like documentation of this termination, including the specific grounds and the authorization from the board. Callista finally looked up, annoyed that I was still standing there. The board doesn't need to authorize staffing decisions. That's what a CEO does. I'm the CEO now. Things are going to change around here. She said it with such confidence, such absolute certainty. Like repeating the title enough times would make it real, would somehow transfer decades of institutional knowledge and hard-earned authority into her perfectly highlighted hair and designer wardrobe. I'll be gone within the hour, I said. But I think your father should know about the board meeting scheduled for 2 o'clock this afternoon. Might want to check his calendar. Then I walked out before she could respond, past Daphne the HR rep who looked genuinely confused, past the security guard who'd worked here for 15 years and knew exactly who I was, past the framed photos in the hallway showing Cascade Freight's history from startup to $680 million empire. There I was in half those photos, standing next to William, cutting ribbons at new facilities, shaking hands with major clients, accepting industry awards. And hey, since you're already invested in this story, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Give it a like if you appreciate watching entitled Rich Kids Learn Expensive Lessons About Corporate Structure. Because trust me, this is about to get beautifully messy and you'll want to see how it ends. The algorithm loves engagement and I love an audience that appreciates good old-fashioned justice. Now back to the part where everything falls apart for Callista Rhodes. 2 hours. That's all the time between my termination and her first real crisis. I spent those 2 hours in my car in the parking garage, laptop open, phone fully charged, watching the email notifications roll in as the board packet I'd sent at 6:15 that morning finally started getting opened and read. See, while Callista was probably celebrating her first major executive decision with an iced coffee and a social media post about tough leadership choices and the future of freight logistics, 7 board members were opening certified mail that explained exactly what she'd just triggered. The packet wasn't subtle. Couldn't be, given what was at stake. Cover page. Emergency shareholder action, Article 9 protocol activation. Page 2. Complete equity breakdown showing every share of Cascade Freight Solutions, every transaction, every carefully negotiated stock agreement over nearly 3 decades. Page 3 through 47. Legal documentation proving that I, Avery Langston, controlled 83% of the company through a complex but entirely legitimate structure of voting shares, stock options converted during strategic inflection points, and equity purchases made during moments when other people needed cash more than they needed ownership. The final page was the kicker. Immediate suspension of all executive authority pending emergency shareholder review, triggered automatically when a non-equity executive terminates a founding member without board approval. Article 9. We'd written it into the corporate bylaws 17 years ago after William's nephew tried to fire half the accounting department during a cocaine-fueled weekend where he'd decided he was going to revolutionize the company culture. William had been horrified, I'd been furious, and our legal team had been expensive but thorough. The protocol was simple. If someone with no actual ownership stake tried to unilaterally terminate a founding member or majority shareholder, their authority would be immediately suspended until the board could convene and sort out the mess. It required a meeting within 4 hours of activation. It transferred all interim decision-making power to the largest shareholder, me. I'd activated it at 6:15 a.m., before Callista even arrived at the office in her Mercedes SUV that Daddy bought her for her 25th birthday. I knew what was coming. Had known for 3 weeks, ever since William called me from his vacation home in Napa Valley, voice heavy with guilt and exhaustion, to tell me he was stepping down and installing his daughter as CEO. Avery, she's finally ready. Got her MBA. Worked at that consulting firm for 18 months. She's got fresh ideas about modernization and technology integration. I think it's time to let the next generation take the wheel. Translation. His wife had been nagging him about giving Callista a real job and he was tired of arguing. Tired of hearing about how his daughter's friends were all starting companies or getting executive positions while she was stuck, doing whatever minimal work she'd been doing at that consulting firm where she probably spent more time on LinkedIn than on actual client projects. I'd congratulated William, wished him well in his retirement, and immediately started preparing for exactly this scenario. Because I knew Callista Rhodes. Had watched her grow up, watched her drift through college, watched her treat every job like it was a temporary inconvenience before her inevitable inheritance. She'd been spoiled, entitled, and utterly unprepared for actual responsibility her entire life. And I knew, absolutely knew, that one of her first moves would be to get rid of the old guard, who might question her decisions or slow down her grand plans for transformation. So I'd prepared the documentation. Had everything notarized, certified, filed with the Delaware Secretary of State where Cascade Freight was incorporated. Had my attorney review every page 3 times. Made sure every signature was genuine, every date was accurate, every claim was bulletproof. Then I'd waited. The first phone call came at 11:43 a.m. My attorney, Leonard Ashworth, 71 years old and sharp as broken glass. Avery, the Rhodes camp just called me. They want to know if this is real. It's real, I confirmed, watching the parking garage entrance from my car. All of it? The 83%? Every share documented and verified. I've been building this position since 1996, Leonard. You know that. You've reviewed every transaction. He laughed, a dry sound that held 3 decades of legal experience. William has no idea, does he? William knows I have equity. He just never asked how much. Nobody did. They saw me as the operations person, the logistics expert, the reliable second-in-command who kept everything running smoothly. They never bothered to check how much of the company I actually owned. The board meeting is mandatory now, Leonard said. Article 9 is binding. They have to convene by 2 o'clock or face personal liability for breach of fiduciary duty. I'll be there at 1:55, I told him. The second call came at 12:17 p.m. William Rhodes himself, voice tight with panic. Avery, what the hell is going on? My lawyer just sent me some document saying you're claiming majority ownership and Callista's been suspended? I'm not claiming anything, William. I'm exercising rights I've held for years. Your daughter terminated me without cause and without board authorization. That triggered Article 9. You remember Article 9, right? You signed it. Silence on the other end. I could picture him in his Napa Valley study, expensive scotch probably in hand, trying to remember corporate bylaws he hadn't thought about in over a decade. But, you can't own 83% of my company. That's impossible. It's not your company anymore, William. It's our company. Always has been. You just never paid attention to the equity structure because you trusted me to handle the boring details while you focused on growth and client relationships. More silence. Then quieter. How long have you had majority control? Officially, 11 years. Functionally, probably closer to 15. Jesus Christ, Avery. I didn't hide it, William. Every transaction was properly filed and documented. Board approved when required, properly valued, completely legitimate. You want to know why I never flaunted it? Because I didn't need the ego stroke. I needed the security. I needed to make sure that after I left the army and put everything into building this company with you, nobody could just arbitrarily decide I was expendable. Your daughter decided I was expendable this morning, I continued. So now we're going to have a conversation about authority, ownership, and what happens when someone mistakes a title for actual power. William's voice cracked slightly. She's my daughter, Avery. I know. And I've got nothing personal against her. But she just fired a majority shareholder without cause, without process, and without understanding what she was doing. The board has to address that. It's not optional. The third call came at 1:22 p.m. Callista Rhodes, no longer calm and dismissive, now audibly furious. What the hell did you do? My father's lawyers are saying I'm suspended? That's illegal. I'm calling my attorney. Your attorney will tell you the same thing mine already confirmed, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. You terminated a founding member without board approval. Under Article 9 of the corporate bylaws, that automatically suspends executive authority pending shareholder review. It's completely legal and entirely your fault for not reading the documents before you started making power moves. This is insane. You're just an employee. You don't own this company. Check the filings with Delaware, I suggested. Take your time. We've got about 30 minutes before the board meeting starts, and you're going to want to understand exactly what you're walking into. She hung up on me. Probably threw her phone across her office, maybe screamed at Daphne, the HR rep. Definitely called her father back to demand he fix this immediately. But there was no fixing it. Article 9 wasn't a suggestion or a guideline. It was a legally binding protocol that activated automatically, like a tripwire connected to a very expensive explosive. Once triggered, the only way forward was through the board meeting, through the shareholder review, through the formal process that would either validate or reverse the termination. And since I controlled 83% of the voting shares, I knew exactly how that vote was going to go. At 1:55 p.m., I walked back into Cascade Freight Solutions. Same building, same elevator, same marble floors I'd helped William select when we built this headquarters facility 9 years ago. But everything felt different now. The security guard who'd been told to escort me out that morning now nodded respectfully and held the elevator door. The receptionist who'd avoided my eyes during the termination actually smiled and said, "Conference room B, Ms. Langston. They're waiting for you." They were indeed waiting. All 7 board members, faces ranging from shocked to resigned to carefully neutral. William Rhodes sat at the far end of the table, looking like he'd aged a decade since our phone call. Still wearing his casual retirement clothes, jeans and a polo shirt, hair uncombed. The man who'd built a freight empire from nothing, now realizing he'd accidentally handed control to someone who'd just fumbled it spectacularly. Callista was already there too, sitting in the CO's chair like it was a throne she refused to vacate. Arms crossed, expression defiant, flanked by 2 attorneys who looked expensive and worried. I didn't sit immediately. Opened my briefcase with practiced precision, removed a single document and placed it on the polished conference table. Then I spoke clearly to the assembled board. As majority shareholder of Cascade Freight Solutions, holding 83% of all voting shares, I formally invoke Article 9 shareholder review and request an immediate vote on the executive termination issued this morning. The board chair, Donald Fletcher, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. 72 years old, former federal judge, the kind of person who took corporate governance very seriously. Motion received and recorded. This emergency session is now convened under Article 9 protocols. Ms. Rhodes, you're welcome to remain, but please understand that your executive authority is currently suspended pending the outcome of this review. Callista's face flushed red. This is a coup. She's staging a hostile takeover of my father's company. I finally sat down, choosing the chair directly across from her. Your father's company became our company 29 years ago when we founded it together. The equity structure evolved over 3 decades of legitimate transactions. There's no hostile takeover here, Just consequences for terminating a majority shareholder without cause or process. One of her attorneys leaned over to whisper in her ear. She shook her head violently, clearly not liking whatever legal reality he was explaining. Donald Fletcher pulled out his own copy of the shareholder documentation. I'd made sure every board member received the complete package via certified courier. The vote is straightforward. The board must determine whether the termination of Ms. Langston was proper and authorized. If not, Article 9 requires reversal of the termination and review of the executive appointment that issued it. William Rhodes spoke up for the first time, voice tired and strained. Before we vote, I'd like to understand something, Avery. You say you've had majority control for 11 years. Why now? Why activate this protocol today? Because your daughter fired me today, I replied simply. If she'd taken the time to understand the company structure, to build relationships with the existing leadership team, to learn the business before making radical staffing changes, we wouldn't be here. But she walked into my office this morning, terminated me without cause, and told me she was building a dynamic leadership team. That triggered Article 9 automatically. I didn't choose the timing, William. She did. She's always had it out for me, Callista interjected, her voice rising. Ever since I was a kid, she's been undermining me, making me look bad in front of my father, acting like she's so much smarter than everyone else. I've barely spoken to you in 10 years, I said, keeping my tone even. We've been at maybe 6 company events together where we exchanged pleasantries. I've never undermined you because until 3 weeks ago, you weren't in a position to be undermined. You were working at a consulting firm and I was running operations for a logistics company. Our paths rarely crossed. Donald Fletcher intervened before Callista could respond. Personal grievances aside, we need to address the legal question. Ms. Langston, the documentation shows you do indeed control 83% of voting shares through legitimate acquisitions over 29 years. Ms. Rhodes, you were appointed CEO 3 weeks ago but hold 0 equity stake. Under Article 9, your termination of a founding member without board consultation triggered this automatic review. He looked around the table at the other board members. The vote is whether to uphold or reverse the termination. Given the circumstances and the protocol requirements, I'll now call for a show of hands. All in favor of reversing Ms. Langston's termination and reinstating her position? The vote wasn't even close. Donald Fletcher raised his hand first. Then Pauline Yates, our head of operations and the longest-serving board member after William and me. Then Richard Kowalski, the investor representative who'd put $40 million into Cascade Freight 8 years ago. Then Sandra Liu, our CFO, who understood exactly how much of the company's success depended on efficient logistics management. Even William Rhodes, after a long, painful pause where he looked at his daughter with genuine regret, slowly raised his hand. 5-0 in favor of reversal, Donald announced. The termination is invalidated, and Ms. Langston is officially reinstated. Now we must address the secondary question. Whether the executive appointment that issued this termination should be reviewed and potentially rescinded. No, Callista said, standing abruptly. Absolutely not. You can't fire me. I'm the CEO. Your appointment is subject to board approval, Donald replied, his judge voice coming through clearly. This board appointed you 3 weeks ago based on your father's recommendation. Given that your first major action as CEO was to illegally terminate a majority shareholder, this board now has serious concerns about your readiness for the role. Daddy, Callista turned to her father, desperation creeping into her voice. Tell them I'm ready. I've been preparing for this my whole life. William Rhodes looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. His hands were shaking slightly as he rubbed his face, trying to find words that wouldn't destroy his relationship with either his daughter or his business partner of 3 decades. Sweetheart, he finally said, voice gentle but firm, you weren't ready. I thought maybe jumping in would force you to grow into the role, but... He gestured at the conference room, at the lawyers, at the documentation scattered across the table. This isn't how a CEO should start. You fired Avery without talking to anyone, without checking the bylaws, without understanding the ownership structure. That's not leadership. That's recklessness. Callista's eyes filled with tears, but they were angry tears, the kind that came from wounded pride rather than sadness. You're choosing her over me. Your own daughter. I'm choosing the company over ego, William replied, and I could hear decades of business experience in those words. And right now, the company needs stable leadership from people who understand how it actually works. Donald Fletcher called for the second vote. All in favor of rescinding the CEO appointment of Callista Rhodes, effective immediately? This time all 5 hands went up instantly, including William's. There was no hesitation, no long pause. Just swift, unanimous agreement that the experiment had failed before it even really began. 5-0, Donald said. The appointment is rescinded. Ms. Rhodes, your executive authority is terminated as of this moment. You'll have 24 hours to remove your personal belongings from the executive office. Callista looked around the table in shock, like she couldn't believe this was actually happening. Her attorneys were already packing their briefcases, probably calculating billable hours and planning their exit strategy from what had become an unwinnable situation. This isn't over, Callista said, her voice shaking. I'll sue. I'll take this to court. Her attorney put a hand on her arm, leaning in to whisper urgently. Whatever he said made her stop talking, though her expression remained defiant and furious. The board has made its decision, Donald said with finality. Unless there's additional business to discuss, this emergency session is adjourned. There was one more item, I said, and everyone's attention turned back to me. The question of ongoing leadership structure. William has retired and the CEO position is now vacant. I'd like to formally nominate myself for the role, given my majority ownership and 29 years of operational experience with this company. The vote was a formality at that point. 5-0 again, though William abstained this time, probably trying to maintain some shred of neutrality that might salvage his relationship with his daughter. By 3:30 p.m. I was back in an office. Not my old office, which had been converted into a creative collaboration space last week, but the corner office on the executive floor. The CEO's office, where Callista had sat this morning, scrolling through her phone while casually destroying my career. The nameplate was already being changed. Avery Langston, Chief Executive Officer. Callista was escorted out by the same security guard who'd been told to remove me that morning. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. She left without her belongings, too angry and humiliated to stick around for the ceremonial packing of personal items. Just stormed out to her Mercedes, slammed the door hard enough that I heard it from the 12th floor, and peeled out of the parking garage like she was fleeing a crime scene. Maybe in her mind she was. Maybe she'd convinced herself this was theft, conspiracy, some elaborate betrayal orchestrated by the woman who'd helped build everything she'd just lost. William stayed behind after everyone else had left. Stood in the doorway of my new office, looking older and smaller than I'd ever seen him. 29 years, he said quietly. You've owned the majority for 11 years and I never knew. I never lied about it, I replied, gesturing for him to sit. Every transaction was documented. Filed properly. You had access to all the records. You just never looked. Because I trusted you. And you should have kept trusting me instead of handing authority to someone who wasn't ready for it. He sank into the chair across from my desk. She's my only child, Avery. Her mother kept pushing me to give her a real opportunity to let her prove herself. I don't know what I thought. That maybe responsibility would mature her. Responsibility without preparation is just chaos, I said. You know that. We've seen it happen 100 times with clients who promote people too fast or hire based on connections instead of competence. What happens now? William asked. Do I still have a place here? You're still president. Still on the board. Still own 12% of the company. None of that has changed. What's changed is that the CEO position is now held by someone who actually understands the business and won't make impulsive decisions that could destroy what we've built. He nodded slowly, processing the new reality. And Callista? She's welcome to work here in a non-executive capacity if she wants to learn the business from the ground up. Start in operations, maybe work in logistics coordination, understand how freight actually moves before trying to transform the entire industry. But that's her choice. I won't force it. She'll never do that, William said with certainty. Her pride won't allow it. Then she'll find something else. She's 26, has an MBA, comes from a wealthy family. She'll land on her feet. But she won't be doing it here in a position of authority she hasn't earned. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 3 decades of partnership settling between us. Finally, William stood to leave. For what it's worth, he said at the door, you were always the better choice for Sue. I was just too proud or too stubborn or too guilty to admit it. After he left, I spent an hour just sitting at the desk looking out the window at the freight yard below. Trucks coming and going, containers being loaded and unloaded. The precise choreography of logistics that I'd spent nearly 3 decades perfecting. This company wasn't built on charisma or connections or MBA theories. It was built on understanding that every shipment mattered, every delivery had to be on time, every client deserved reliability over flash. Callista had wanted to disrupt that. Wanted to bring in consultants and implement new software platforms and restructure everything to match whatever she'd learned in business school case studies. She'd have probably destroyed half our client relationships within 6 months, alienated our best employees within a year. Instead, she'd destroyed only her own authority, and she'd done it in record time. The next morning, there was no dramatic company-wide announcement. No email blast about new leadership or organizational changes. Just a quiet update to the website and internal directory, listing Avery Langston as CEO and noting that William Rhodes had transitioned to an advisory role as president. Some employees noticed immediately. Others took days to realize what had happened. But the drivers kept their routes, the warehouse staff kept moving freight, the account managers kept serving clients. The company that had taken 3 decades to build kept running smoothly because the person now in charge was the same person who'd been keeping it running all along. I just made it official. 2 weeks later, I got a LinkedIn message from Callista Rhodes. It was brief, cold, and professional in that way that meant an attorney had probably reviewed it before she sent it. I'm taking a position at Horizon Global Ventures. Looking forward to new challenges and opportunities to leverage my strategic vision in a more innovative environment. I'm sure Cascade Freight will continue on its traditional path under legacy leadership. Translation. She'd found another job, probably through family connections, and wanted me to know she was fine, successful, moving forward. The dig about legacy leadership was childish but expected. She needed to save face somehow, needed to convince herself and everyone else that leaving wasn't a humiliating defeat but a strategic choice. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. We'd both moved on to where we belonged. William and I had lunch the following month at that overpriced steakhouse downtown where we'd celebrated major contracts and milestone achievements over the years. He looked healthier, more relaxed, like retirement was actually agreeing with him now that he'd stopped trying to force his daughter into a role she wasn't suited for. Callista's doing well at the new place, he offered, probably testing to see if I'd react negatively. They've got her in business development. Lower pressure, more mentorship. I think it's a better fit. I'm glad, I said, and I meant it. He's smart, William. She just wasn't ready to run a $680 million operation on day one. Maybe in 10 years, after she's actually learned how businesses work, she'll be ready for executive leadership somewhere. Just not here, he said with a slight smile. Just not here, I agreed. We talked about Cascade Freight's expansion plans, about the new contracts I was negotiating, about the technology improvements I actually was implementing, but carefully, thoughtfully, with input from people who understood the operational realities. William offered advice when I asked for it, stayed out of the way when I didn't. It was the partnership we should have had all along, with clear roles and mutual respect. As we finished our meal, William raised his glass. To the person who actually built this company while I was busy taking credit for it. To the partnership that survived everything, even nepotism, I countered, clinking my glass against his. 6 months after my termination and reinstatement, Cascade Freight closed our largest contract ever. A $280 million logistics partnership with a major manufacturing conglomerate that had been courting multiple providers. They chose us because of our reliability, our track record, our understanding of complex supply chains. During the final negotiation meeting, their CEO asked me directly, "How do you maintain such consistent performance across such a large operation?" "By never forgetting that logistics is about details," I replied. "Every shipment, every timeline, every client requirement matters. You can't disrupt your way to reliability. You have to build it, maintain it, and protect it from people who think innovation means ignoring the fundamentals." They signed the contract that afternoon. That evening, I drafted an email to all Cascade Freight employees. Not a victory lap or a self-congratulatory speech, just a straightforward update about the new contract, what it meant for the company, and how their continued dedication to excellence had made it possible. At the bottom, I added one line. Sometimes the best leadership is simply recognizing and supporting the people who've been doing excellent work all along. Thank you for making this company what it is. I almost deleted that line, worried it was too sentimental or too obvious a reference to recent events. But I left it in, hit send, and watched the responses roll in from employees who'd been with us for years, who'd weathered the uncertainty of sudden leadership changes, who'd stayed committed to the work because they believed in what we were building. That night, I drove past the headquarters building on my way home. The Cascade Freight sign glowed against the evening sky, the parking lot still half full with employees working late on shipments and schedules. Trucks lined up at the loading docks, drivers checking manifests, logistics coordinators managing the constant flow of commerce that kept the economy moving. This was what authority looked like. Not a title on a business card or a corner office with expensive furniture. Not a LinkedIn profile full of buzzwords or an MBA diploma in a designer frame. Real authority came from understanding the work, respecting the people who did it, and being willing to protect what you'd built against anyone who thought they could take it without earning it. Callista Rhodes had learned that lesson the hard way. Cost her the CEO position at a $680 million company, cost her the respect of the board, cost her the relationship with the employees who'd watched her try to fire someone without understanding who she was really firing. But maybe, eventually, it would make her a better leader somewhere else. Maybe she'd remember the day she tried to terminate a majority shareholder and got her own authority revoked instead. Maybe she'd learn to ask questions before making assumptions, to understand power structures before trying to wield power, to earn respect instead of expecting it to come automatically with a title. Or maybe she'd spend the rest of her career blaming me, calling it a coup or a conspiracy or an example of the old guard refusing to let go. People believed what they needed to believe to protect their self-image. Either way, Cascade Freight Solutions would keep running. The trucks would keep rolling. The shipments would keep arriving on time. And the person in the CEO's office would be someone who'd spent 29 years earning that position. One carefully negotiated equity stake at a time, one successful contract at a time, one demonstration of competence at a time. Sometimes patience is the most powerful strategy. Sometimes staying quiet about your actual authority is smarter than announcing it. And sometimes when entitled leadership finally collides with earned power, justice is served through corporate bylaws and shareholder agreements instead of dramatic confrontations. Callista Rhodes fired me on her first day as CEO. I owned 83% of the company she thought she was running. Article 9 of our corporate bylaws did the rest. And if you've made it this far in the story, you already know how rarely things work out this perfectly in the corporate world. But every once in a while, someone who spent decades building something gets to protect it from someone who thought authority came from a family name and a job title. Subscribe if you want more stories about what happens when preparation meets opportunity, when documentation beats arrogance, and when the person everyone underestimated turns out to be the person holding all the cards. Because trust me, in boardrooms across the country, this exact scenario plays out more often than you'd think. Most people just don't have the equity structure to back up their authority when challenged. I did. And that made all the difference.